All right, let's start with our top story now. President Cyril Ramaphosa has provided more detail on his measures to stimulate economic growth. He mentioned road infrastructure and train construction as among the projects his administration will focus on. Ramaphosa was replying in Parliament to the debate on his State of the Nation address. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
The 7 priorities that will guide the program of action of this administration over the next 5 years begins with the implementation in the coming days, in the coming weeks, as well as in the coming months. As I mentioned last week, we are determined to do things differently. The litany of 1,000 outcomes will be replaced by a tight set of smart indicators for government to pursue. These will be contained in the medium-term strategic framework, which will set out the action plan of government for the next 5 years. Each government department will produce a forward-looking practical annual performance plan that reflects on our renewed focus on impact. Each minister will sign a performance agreement by which they will be evaluated and for which they will be held accountable. In the 4 months leading up to the medium-term budget statement in October, we will also work to meet some of the immediate policy milestones. These include an action plan on the effective visa regime for tourism and high-skill immigration, a policy directive on the release of the spectrum as we announced, an integrated and comprehensive youth employment strategy coordinated by a project management office in the presidency, engagement with organized business on the ease of doing business roadmap, a national plan of action to tackle extortion and violence at economic sites, especially in the construction sector.
All right, so for more on the President's reply, we're joined on the line by the University of Johannesburg's Professor Steven Friedman. Prof, thank you very much for your time this evening. Of course, amidst all the criticism of the President's State of the Nation address, some referring to it as an empty dream, what's your take on his response today?
Well, I think that, he did go into detail, whether you like the detail or not. I mean, obviously, we're a democracy. People are entitled to not like the detail. And I think also, it's very easy, in all the cynical reaction, etc., to miss, some important changes in government thinking. And there were 2 which I noticed in the speech, which I think, sound technical but are important for South Africans. The one is he talked a lot about getting South Africans to invest. Now, usually when Mr. Ramaphosa or people around him talk about investment, we think they're talking about foreigners. But there's a lot of evidence around the world to show that if you want foreigners to invest in your country, you first have to get local people to invest. Yeah. So I think if they're serious about making the priority getting South Africans to invest, we're more likely to start seeing improvements in our economy than if you go around the place asking foreigners to invest in you even though you're not growing. The second one, which I think could be potentially important, is that he talked about making sure that people in townships who start small businesses can actually get in on the mainstream economy. And that's actually addressing the biggest problem which faces this country's economy today. And that is that you have tens of thousands of people in townships and shack settlements who work very hard, who have good ideas, and who can't get in on the economy. And as long as that happens, we're not going to be nearly using the potential of all our people, and we're not going to be growing. So if government is indeed serious about saying, look, those South Africans who get up every morning and do all sorts of new things to keep families in shack settlements and townships going and thriving, that those people are actually finally going to get their place in the mainstream economy, then we really could start to see real progress against poverty and its other ills in this country. But of of course, we've got to look very carefully to see whether these are just words or whether they're actually programs.
And that's exactly it, Prof, is that he spent a lot of time in his reply justifying his dream/vision. Do you think he came out clearer on the detail regarding the implementation of it? Because that's where much of the criticism also came from.
Yeah, look, I mean, the clip you played, for example, is a very good indication. You know, all we can get from a State of the Nation address or from the President's response to it is what his government's thinking is at the moment. You know, you can't just sit there and listen to a speech and decide how everything is going to develop over the next while or so. Yeah. Now, he was very clear about what the thinking is. And the thinking is that instead of coming up with long lists of wonderful things government wants to achieve, government is going to be very focused, he says. Government is going to, you know, he spelled out the few priorities, he spelled out the programs which are on the way at the moment, and the idea is that government can win the trust of South Africans back if it shows that it's doing things, that it's actually making concrete progress. And you don't do that by setting yourself 110 goals and then achieving 3 or 4 of them. Yeah. So, you know, once again, let's see. You know, he spelled out those priority areas relating to, you know, to crime, violence, to aspects of the economy. And I think there's a huge obligation on us as citizens to say, well, you know, you've put your money where your mouth is. You said you're going to do this. You know, show us. I think, you know, that's how it works in a democracy. Citizens have got to say, look, if this is what government says it's going to do, we want to make sure that it actually puts its money where its mouth is.
Yeah, but Prof, you know, putting your money where your mouth is means, of course, that dream or vision has got to resonate with the ordinary mass. Because what would resonate with them, of course, would be tangible solutions with actual targets. Did it miss that?
Look, I think that is a problem. And I'll tell you what, you know, one point that I made, you know, if you're going to make a speech and talk a lot about vision, etc., I just found it interesting listening to the whole speech. That poor people virtually didn't appear in the speech at all. I mean, they'd occasionally get a mention. Yeah. And, you know, the sad reality is that poor people today are the majority of South Africans. So I think there is a problem there in the sense that even if you have tremendously interesting ideas and you want to fix things, you know, if you're not actually in touch with the majority of the country, and you're not actually reflecting what people experience in most of the country, then people will not take you entirely seriously. You know, just as one example, we've all got anecdotes. I mean, I spoke to somebody after the original working person after the original one, and he said, well, you know, I just didn't hear anything which talked about me. Yeah. And I think that that's a valid consideration. I think if you want to be president of everybody, you have to talk to the concerns of everybody, and you particularly have to be concerned about what the majority are going through. Yeah.
Prof, now all of this has all been centered around this new hope, this new dawn of President Cyril Ramaphosa, and fixing the country is what the president has spoken about since February 2018. But just today, you have the Auditor General's report talking about, of the more than 200 municipalities, a few of those receiving clean audits. This is the coalface of service delivery. How does one read between what the president is saying and the Auditor General's report, which was released today, that paints a very big picture of municipalities which are in direct contact with people on the ground level?
Look, I don't think we should make the mistake of saying that because they're huge problems, nothing is changing. I mean, I would assume that if you asked the president tonight whether local government was in huge trouble, he'd agree with you. There's no disagreement about the fact that the country has been severely damaged, that there are huge problems with corruption and mismanagement. What we need to judge this president on and this government on is, do we think they actually have realistic and implementable plans to deal with the problem? So, you know, after a long period of very serious problems, I'm not particularly surprised that the Auditor General's report says what it says. What I think we need to look at very carefully is, are we fixing these problems? And I think that's what the government needs to be judged on.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much for your time. I'm afraid that's all we have time for tonight. That was a research professor at the University of Johannesburg, Professor Steven Friedman, talking to us, of course, giving his insights on the president's reply.